let us consider a case study. Recent Instagram photos from Israel's, quote, war with Gaza, if the definition of war includes a highly extensive and functional capital economy with planes and tanks and rockets fighting a highly disorganized and economically disabled bazooka and AK-47 militia, posted by Israeli soldiers, is a good example of evolved states who prudently mix sophisticated, multifaceted, and straightforward dimensional means of control. Albeit the persons who took pictures of themselves are likely to be on reserve and far removed from the bombings, but as has been seen in Iraq, technologically destructive capabilities have advanced to the point where it is not necessary to be directly in the line of fire. We have on-screen killing power reminiscent of video games. Of course, this removal may actually be useful since the psychological weight is definitely a huge factor. Examples can be found for the advancement of coarse, explicit, and brutal forms of control as well. One report explains how Israel uses exact calorie counts to avoid the malnutrition of bodies in Gaza while maintaining their weakness. These examples reveal an organ of the highly evolved, addiction-prone super-leviathan we have come to be so dependent on. All this while Iran is supposedly close to crossing some sort of red line or something.
This is a bomb. This is a fuse. So if these are the facts, and they are, where should a red line be drawn? A red line should be drawn right here.
Chomsky talks about one proposed solution to any potential Iranian threat, a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East. Is there no motivation for peace? There seems to be a lack of rationale behind Israel's war on Gaza, revealing deeper, more disturbing implications. There is no casus belli nor raison d'etat behind the actions of the Israeli state. Any analysis of state action requires that the researcher be able to put himself in the situation or cognitive mindset of the subject. The method is to carry out and try to understand the agencies or persons which have decision-making power within the varied forces of influence. Sovereign states usually follow particular paths. These paths all fall under a general way of doing things, a raison d'etat, that is, a national interest fueled by political, economic, or cultural motivations that seek to gain or maintain some sort of power, privilege, legitimacy, nobility, capital, social capital, or whatever. The worst-case scenario of which would involve only what may be called Machiavellian considerations, the ability to scope and carry out a cartography of the various possible options based on these decision makers depends on relating our research to the on-the-ground facts and capabilities with the historically established evolving subjective goals and perceptions. There are times, however, when these facts and goals diverge, and the cost of dealing with the consequence of a decision is high regardless. This is where we can locate the crux of a raison d'etat, the usually utilitarian cost-benefit analysis. The supposed war on Gaza, however, is an example of an anomaly. The actions taken are unduly burdensome and costly. Large and repetitive investments go into increasingly infamous decisions to go to war. As just hinted, every aspect of this phenomenon is questioned, including its name. Can such an asymmetric power balance be called a war? Even through a hawkish perspective, it would make more sense for Israel to merely ramp up security to the extreme by enacting draconian measures. It is also more than capable of handling military threats from Hamas. Chomsky explains,
as is commonly the case, the pretext lacked any credibility. In 2008, a truce was established between Israel and Hamas. The Israeli government formally recognizes that Hamas observed it fully. Not a single Hamas rocket was fired until Israel broke the truce under the cover of U.S. election on November 4th, 2008, invading Gaza on ludicrous grounds and killing half a dozen Hamas members.
So then, what is rational? Where is the rational? There is a possibility that establishing a continuous war zone would bring about exhaustion and submissiveness in the long run, where more and more Palestinians would be prone to either attempt to escape or succumb to the demands of the Israeli state, however they may be articulated. Yet, when considering the power behind a zeal of vengeance, not to mention the latent potential of a fanatical Islamic call to arms, where even the bodies of women and children are put on the front lines, the efficacy of a war becomes questionable and hard to comprehend, even from a staunch, realist perspective. Assuming that the Palestinians would never negotiate for a permanent peace treaty, it would seem that creating an even more extensive and permanent state of securitization would be a much better way of imposing a feeling of powerlessness on a resistant population in Gaza, if indeed that is the goal. Establishing an environment of totalization and panopticonism, a usual strategy employed by imperialist powers. When every aspect of life is not necessarily micromanaged, but rather under surveillance, it creates a culture of self-regulation, self-management, confession, betrayal, and gossip. The rate of production of compliant and obedient bodies could be expanded by improving on the already present systems of martial law, military tools, and checkpoints. By installing a postmodern and neoliberal police state, as opposed to a regular fascistic police state like that of Iran, made up of, for example, rampant cameras, information monitoring, increased police presence, stop and frisk policies, random checkups and raids, bureaucracies, arbitrary detentions, ID cards, restrictive Gazan pre-citizenship, residential schools, etc., framed as being the incorporation of freedom and democracy into Palestine, while also always providing an option to escape. In other words, this strategy of dividing, securitizing, and gradual conquest is a much better policy for breaking the will of a populace compared to a war. While more costly, another much faster and simpler method of engineering a peaceful society would be to impose a mass exodus of Palestinians, thinning out Gaza and reducing it to a 1-kilometer strip along the 11-kilometer Egyptian border would not be too hard, because flattening buildings with tanks and bulldozers is not an alien procedure for the Israeli state. At the same time, squads of soldiers can slowly kidnap and relocate families and drop them off in Syria and Pakistan to reduce the Palestinian population, also something which is not alien. Though this would be an extensive project, it is totally possible given the capabilities of the Israeli state.
I've been here for about a month and a half now, and this is definitely the most difficult situation that I've ever seen. In the time that I've been here, children have been shot and killed. On the 30th of January, the Israeli military bulldozed the 2 largest water wells, destroying over half of Rafah's water supply. Every few days, if not every day, houses are demolished here. People are economically devastated because of the closure of the borders into Egypt and the extreme control of the Gazan economy by Israel. I came to look at the aftermath of a place where 25 greenhouses had been demolished on the other side of Rafah, destroying the livelihoods of about 300 people. And that had taken place while they rounded up about 150 men, held them under a sniper tower, and shot around them to contain the men, the farmers in the area. So I feel like what I'm witnessing here is a very systematic destruction of people's ability to survive. And that is incredibly horrifying.